Okay, thank you. And welcome to this last presentation of the Developer Days. My name is Menno Pieters. I'm a Principal Solution Architect. I work with SailPoint in the EMEA Professional Services team. My presentation is about event triggers to systems behind the firewall. And I'm going to start with a short introduction of the business problem and why we're going to do this. And then I'm going to introduce the solution itself and how to use it. I'm going to dive a little bit into the API and show you using a demo how this works. So let's get started. The IdentityNow triggers are basically cloud to cloud. So the triggers that you create are going to some internet-facing recipient. So they actually need to be delivered to a system that listens on the internet. And well, your on-premise systems may not be listening. They need to receive it, but you may not want to open a firewall. So yeah, the triggers that IdentityNow sends are tried once and there is no retry. So if the receiving side is under maintenance and cannot receive messages, the information is lost. And as I said, you may not want to open up your firewall. The receiving of these messages requires you to open up the firewall, the corporate firewall or a reverse proxy, and potentially some other network components. And there's not a 100% guarantee that the traffic will always come from the same IP address. Cloud architectures change very often. So what we need is a system in the middle that can receive it for us, where we can just pick them up. And this system needs to be reachable from the internet. And it should be able to temporarily store the messages that the actual client will then later pick up. This is something that could also be established with what Neil just described, using the event bridge, and you could put the messages on an S3 bucket or use an SQS queue, and then you pick it up from there. This is just a very simple representation of that same thought. What we do here is we have a system that lives in the clouds or on some cloud hosted system. And when IdentityNow triggers something, that's where we start. And IdentityNow sends a message to this cloud queue. So we receive a message and the cloud queue will just store the message as is, doesn't do anything with it, no filtering, nothing. It will just store it. And then periodically, your system on premise can pull the cloud and see, is there anything for me to do? Is there any message to be picked up? And if so, the cloud queue will reach from its database and says, okay, I got a message for you. And there it is. And sometimes these messages also require some response. So the system on-premise can directly send its message back to IdentityNow. So what do we need to do to get this running? The system is just a simple Java application, Java web application that is built on top of a MySQL database, and I use it with Tomcat 9. So first of all, you need to create the database. There's a SQL file included with the package, with the software, and then extract the WAR file in your Tomcat server. I use Tomcat 9. I don't think it works on Tomcat 8 and below. And you need to set up a properties file. This properties file is just a file similar to IdentityIQ's properties file that tells the system where the database lives, how to connect to the database, and a few other configuration settings. One of those is the maximum queue age. Messages older than, in this case, 3,600 seconds or 1 hour will be discarded. Furthermore, there is an admin user that you need to set up that can be used to configure the queues and the users or the clients that send the messages to the queue, or are allowed to receive the messages, retrieve them. So what you need to set up is a user. You can pick any suitable username. I set the default to SPAdmin, but you can and you can just pick any user that suits you. And you have to set up a password that should be salted as a SHA-256 hash, and the way you do it is explained in the README file. Or you can even use a simple REST service that comes with the product to generate this hash. And the last one is the token salt. We also want to store the tokens that the clients use, the bearer tokens that the clients use, using a hashing mechanism. But to allow them to be searchable, we need to have a fixed salt in this case. Then let's have a look at the API. Well, first of all, some terminology. I'm using terminology that looks a bit like what you would see in a Postman client. So in the Postman client, you can use placeholders to define variables, and those are identified by two curly brackets on one side and the closing curly brackets on the other side, and the name of the variable in between. So this here, the URL is the base URL for the service. For example, I have ets.example.com/q as the place where my server listens, and where the ETS queue or the cloud queue is running. Then I need some user ID perhaps to identify users, the clients, and a queue, and there are some other things. All the objects are identified by GUID, and furthermore, we can give them a nice description. The simplest REST call that we can make is just a ping, just to see if the system is up and running, so we can use it for monitoring, for load balancing, etc. And the only thing it returns is just pong. There's no authentication necessary for this REST call. It's just ping, and it says pong, and then we know the system is alive. For the admin features, we need to authenticate, and as I explained, you need to set the admin user in the queue properties. You can define a username for your admin, and then you need to set a password, encrypt that or hash it using SSH256. Use a long password because this is, well, these are the keys to the kingdom, and just make sure that it's a safe and long password. To generate it, there are some instructions for command line using OpenSSL and base64 encoding. That's in the README. Or you can use the API, which is just get and then the base URL, rest, admin, and hash. And then after the slash, you put the password. So if you get a very secret password here, then the hash could look like this. And it will look different every time because the first part before the $sign is the salt, and the salt is randomly generated. What can you do with this admin interface? We can manage the queues, the users, and the tokens that the users have, and we can authorize and deauthorize users for the queues and allow them to read or write or both. Well, then one of the most important messages is sending the trigger, and this is what IdentityNow will do. So we post a message and just send it to REST event trigger, and then we specify the ID of the queue, and then as the payload of the message, we send the JSON object. That's what IdentityNow is going to do. And then your client on premise or wherever it lives can go out and check for messages. And there are two operations to do so. The first one is peek, and that's and you also have to specify the queue. You need to authenticate using your generated token, and then the system will say, okay, I've got a message for you. or return an empty message if there's nothing in the queue. If there's a message and you use the peek operation, it will not be removed from the queue. It will just stay there. And every time you use the peek operation, it will just return the same message until you use the poll operation. And the poll operation will just look at the queue and retrieve the message, the first message in the queue, and remove it from the queue. There's a first in, first out. So the first message that comes in is the first to be returned. And if there is a next message after the one you just retrieved, there will also be a marker has next to show that there are more messages in the queue. Now I'm going to my Postman client to show you exactly how this works. So this is a very simple operation, or let me just start with the ping operation first. Ping is just going to send a message, and we're expecting a very simple message back, and there it is, pong. So that's the simplest operation we can do. We know that the system is alive. And there's also a test message for the admin that is just to verify that we can log in. It doesn't do anything. It will just verify and send a success message if the admin was able to log in. And there we go. So status success. I also told you that there is a method to get a password. This doesn't need any authentication. You can just send a password and retrieve the corresponding hash. So if I send this, then I get a hash and I can send it again. I'll get a new hash. I have to mark this as text. And the hash will be different every time because the salt will be different. What I can also do, I can manage users, and I can just get a list of my users, and there will be two in this case. One is IdentityNow, and the other one is the client that's going to pick up the message. It's a bit slow tonight. Okay, there we are. So I have two users. One is my Postman test, and the other is my IdentityNow server. That's my tenant. And one is authorized to both read and write the queue, while IdentityNow is not authorized to read, but is only allowed to write messages to the queue. So whatever is written to the queue cannot be read using this identity. And there could be multiple tokens, and what you see is only the ID of the token so that we can later remove it if we want. And there could be multiple tokens assigned to a user, and each token could also have an expiration date. And let me just quickly create a token. Create user token, there we have it. So I already have a user ID. And as you can see here, there's a description of this token. And let me just set an end date, a valid end date. And that would be tonight, 03, today is the 9th. And I'm going to disable it. It's my local time, almost 8 o'clock. And there we go. So I'm going to send the message or send the message to create a token. And today is the 9th. Yeah, so it will expire in 15 minutes from now. Now you see I've received this token. This is the token that I have to use for authentication, and this is the ID of the token. So if I want to delete the user token again, I can go here, and this should be the token that I just created, BE. Yeah, so I'm going to delete this token. And that's it. So what else can I do? I can create users, and I'm just going to show the message. So this would be a user. I can mark it as active or inactive. and can just give it the name and the display name, and then I will get back an ID, and the ID is actually what we're going to identify the user with. Setting the authorizations is where I pick a user, I pick a queue, and set true or false for the read and write operations. To make this any usable, either one of these should at least be true. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to create any authorizations. Yeah, and furthermore, of course, I can create queues, and those queues, I can just get a list of queues. I currently only have one, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I got a server error. Oh, there it is. Something went wrong. Okay. So this is the only queue that I currently have that I set up for this demonstration. And now let's see what happens if I put a message in the queue. Well, normally, or at the moment, I expect my queue to be empty. So there is probably nothing here. I just do a poll. What's happening here? Something is not right. Unauthorized. Oh, right. I just got the wrong token. Let me quickly go here and edit. I need to reset this to the previous token. Reset. That's because I created a new token. The script automatically stored it. So no, full. Still unauthorized. Just let me create a new token for the user. Get users. Need to make sure that this is my token. Let me delete this one. Token ID. And delete user token. I'm going to delete this token. Get my user. So my postman test still. Okay. Users. Okay, token is gone. I'm going to save this. Don't save. Okay, and create a user token. Just need to make sure that the user I'm using is the right one. Get users. This is my user. Okay, and user ID. Okay, save. Okay, I'm going to create a user token, and that should expire in 10 minutes. So there we go. Or you know what? I'm going to let it expire tomorrow, just to be on the safe side. Okay, and this one should now be 7E on the 70 and 70E 70. E. Okay, press install and save. And now I should be able to pull the queue. And there we have it. Oh, there is still a message. So I just retrieved it and I can see there are more messages. So let me pull until it's empty. Another one. Oh, there's a whole bunch of these. I guess I know what happened. So what I wanted to show you is that I can send a message from IdentityNow, and I set up a message, and apparently something happened in the background due to an aggregation. What this is, I set up a subscription for a source account update, and I didn't set any filters, so anything that changes will trigger an event. So what I had to set up is a URL, and here this is the ID of the queue. There's a bearer token that I selected. I could also use basic authentication. But for this queue, I have to use bearer token, and then the generated token that I created specifically for IdentityIQ. I could set filters, which I haven't done, and that was my mistake. So the queue is filled, and if I now send a test subscription, then it will create a new event in the queue. And back to my Postman client, then yeah, there's a lot of messages here that you can see. There were changes in my finance application, and the finance application had an aggregation. So we can see that there are some attribute changes for these users. And there's a lot of users here. So every change would be stored. And now a service on-premise can go and pick this up. And then I'm going back to my presentation for the last two slides. If you'd like to try this out, set this up on a server, the code is available in this GitHub repo. You can scan the QR code to get this link, or just take the link from this slide. And if you have any contributions, changes, or suggestions to improve, then feel free to fork and submit your changes. And that brings me to the last slide. And I'd like to say thank you for attending and watching this presentation.